Money can be one of the biggest sources of tension in marriage, but it doesn't have to be. This episode of the WinShape Marriage Podcast features financial expert Ron Blue, who shares practical wisdom for navigating money conversations with clarity, grace, and purpose. Ron shares his extensive experience in financial planning and the importance of managing finances within marriage. He discusses common friction points couples face regarding money, the significance of open communication, and how to align financial decisions with faith and generosity. If you and your spouse have trouble getting on the same page about finances or wondering how to approach money in a way that strengthens your marriage, this episode is packed with wisdom you don't want to miss. Let's get started. Well, Ron Blue, thank you so much for joining us today on the WinShape Marriage Podcast. We're super excited to have you.
Well, it's a treat for me. I've known of WinShape for a long time and the ministry that you've got, and so to be a little bit of a part of it is a real privilege.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, we love to hear that. Now, Ron, you're a pretty well-known guy, but for those in our audience that haven't heard about you, do you mind sharing a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So are you testing my humility and pride?
Yeah.
Well, the short story is that I graduated from Indiana University in 1967, went to work on Wall Street, and then had an accounting firm for 7 years, and then started a financial planning firm that's now probably the largest fee-only financial planning firm in the country, which and then I started Kingdom Advisors and was helped start the National Christian Foundation and the Ron Blue Institute. So I've started about 5 things, and they've all but one of them have been ministry related. And the bottom line of my own personal mission that the Lord gave me in 1979 was to help Christians plan and manage their finances so that they would have more to give away and for the funding of the fulfillment of the Great Commission. And that's worked itself out through multiple organizations now, and I'm 83, so I can look back over a long time and I can say God sure worked some miracles. So and I'm married 61 years, 5 kids, 13 grandkids, and 5 great-grandkids.
That's awesome.
And I'm still working.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I was preparing for this episode, just looking through all the different books that you had written, and there were what felt like 35,000 different books on finances and wisdom and all those wonderful topics. And I think it's safe to say that you have a wealth of wisdom on wealth and wisdom. So super excited to jump into our conversation today. Now, Ron, we're with WinShape Marriage. We serve a lot of different couples in every season of life, from couples that are just about to jump into marriage to couples that have been married for 60, 70, 80 years. And, one of the questions that we get all the time is, how do we figure out finances? It seems like no matter what stage of marriage that you're in, finances can always be a little bit of a thorn in your side for some couples. And so I'd love just your perspective on, when it comes to the finances in marriage, why do you think finances are such a big friction point for many couples?
Well, and I've thought about that question a lot because I required, when we did financial planning, that both the husband and wife attend the meetings.
Yeah.
And the reason being is that people think differently. So when you put 2 people who have been trained a particular way into one checkbook, and they've got different personalities, different values, really, different priorities, different goals. They think differently, they process differently. And money is something that transcends every marriage, almost every day. It's that one area of life that's pervasive and transcendent with everyone.
Yeah.
So you've got a naturally difficult situation because you've got 2 people operating out of one checkbook. Not literally necessarily, but figuratively speaking.
Yeah.
And that's bound to create differences, and in many cases, conflict. Um, and people don't have they've not necessarily been trained to have a conversation in this area.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I would say this too, that in America, living in America, we don't necessarily get good financial help. It wasn't until maybe 10 years ago that financial literacy was even taught at the college level.
Yeah. Which is crazy to think about considering how big of a part of your life it is.
Yeah. It was never considered academic. It was considered a life skill maybe, but not an academic area. But it's become, with student debt, has driven a lot of that, but it's really become, we're working with 60 universities, for example, on personal finance. So, so that's really the reason, Rob. It just, you got two people that think differently, act differently, and you're trying to work through decision making.
Yeah, two people from completely different backgrounds. It only makes sense that you would have different approaches and perspectives. And, one of the things that we hear all the time from couples is, finances are an important part of your marriage to talk about, and you want to be on the same page. But for so many people, the idea of talking about finances or having financial conversations with their spouse can feel uncomfortable or overwhelming. In your years of working in the financial space, what advice would you have for couples that might be like, hey, Ron, I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable talking with my spouse about our budget, for example?
Well, I'll tell you something that Judy and I did when especially when we were raising the kids. We would take 2 weekends a year, and we would go away, and on Saturday morning, we would each go to a separate room and just write down our goals, desires, things we wanted to talk about necessarily. And then we spent the afternoon on Saturday kind of processing. Because what we found was that in about 80% of the cases, we were in agreement.
Yeah.
But the 20% were the areas of conflict. And so we made a lot of decisions on those weekends. And the thing about life is that most decisions somehow have an economic impact.
Yep.
So you can be talking about where your kids are going to school, for example, but there's an economic impact.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how we handled it. And one of the guys that worked for me, he and his wife, every Sunday night they went over their finances of the previous week.
Yeah.
Now that's a little bit over the edge for me, but it's you got to probably schedule the time. One, and two, one of the things that really helps is to have somebody facilitate the conversation at maybe once or twice a year.
Yeah.
I required all of our financial planners to have a financial planner, myself included.
Yeah.
So even though I've written a bunch of books and been giving counsel, I can't hold myself accountable. And I might miss some of the nuances of what my wife is saying. And so if I've got somebody else sitting there that can bring that up, it works for a better conversation.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and one I'd love to dive into. I also wanted to touch on a couple of things that you just said. The idea of going away and having some intentional time set to just talk about finances and just talk about vision and dreams and goals for your marriage. Because, I think a common place that a lot of couples will find themselves in is this idea of, hey, we need to talk about finances. We really need to talk finances, but then just like continually put it off and just kind of like treat it like the elephant in the room that neither of you wants to talk about. And so having, like you said, either some intentional scheduled time or just a getaway to go through and talk about things seems like a really smart way to prevent yourself from just continually like sticking it in the corner and not talking about it.
Yeah, if you don't make it intentional, it probably won't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing I love that you said was this idea of, talking about your dreams and your visions and kind of putting those on a sheet of paper separately. And then that way you can come together and say like, hey, this is kind of what I'm dreaming for our future. And then using that as a way of kind of catching the pulse on what you each want out of your financial picture in your marriage, I thought was a really interesting idea. And that, like practice that you and your wife work through, are you drawing like big things, small things, kind of like what sort of things were you going through and like drawing out on a sheet of paper like that?
Well, it could be something from how much. Well, one of the biggies was how are we going to train our children to manage money?
Mm.
So we spent quite a bit of time, and that changes over time because as they grow older, their needs change.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we would be talking about how we're handling it with the kids. And I believe that, I was asked one time by a father, he said, how do you teach your children to manage money? And I said, well, more's caught than taught. They're going to do what you do, but you learn to manage money by managing money.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that now with a credit card society is really difficult to pull off. And with credit cards, you don't even have the sense of the amount of money.
Mm.
But when you're dealing with cash, that's a different story. And
Yeah.
So, we would spend time doing that, and we would be spending time about my travel schedule.
Yeah.
Okay, how are we doing with that? How are we doing spiritually?
Mm.
What anxieties do we have?
Yeah.
Where are we on the same page about where we're going and why we're doing what we're doing?
Mm-hmm.
So it tended to take care of itself in terms of conversation.
Yeah.
And it happens naturally because these things are all in your mind, and the discipline of putting them on paper, they look and feel different when you see them in writing, but you get them out of your mind onto paper, and now you can talk about them. Otherwise, they're stuck in there, and they cause worry, anxiety, or confusion or something.
Yeah. And it can be tricky to try and explain kind of how you're feeling in here, but if you can look at a sheet of paper and say like, oh, I that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It makes it easier for the other person to kind of get a picture of what you're talking about. That
Yeah,
makes complete
for sure.
sense. Yeah.
For sure.
Now, one of the things I'd love to talk with you about today is the idea of generosity in marriage. We talk about what it's like to get on the same page about finances and, some strategies to have that conversation. But, couples might be listening to this podcast and, you've heard the sermon in your church talking about tithing and the importance of that. But could you speak a little bit to how couples can align their finances with their faith in their marriage?
Yeah, I think that's a really good conversation to have in terms of husbands and wives of getting on the same page.
Yeah.
And again, I'll use myself as an example. I'm an accountant by background, so everything ends up on a spreadsheet. Okay.
Yeah.
My wife is far more intuitive in her life processes. And so we would start with, are we in agreement on a tithe? And the answer to that was yes. We've always been in agreement on a tithe. Then moved to kind of how about giving above and beyond to missionaries and to ministries. My wife has certain ministries that she relates to, that she has a passion for. I have different ones. So we would put those two together and say, are we comfortable in how we're handling our giving there.
Yeah.
And then a very, very interesting thing. My wife is naturally generous. Uh, she would give away anything. And so I learned a lot about generosity from her. Um, and for example, um when I sold one of my businesses, and we got a payout, and we got a really nice check for the payout.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, you didn't build that business. God did all that.
Mm.
So we need to get that money back.
Yeah. And how did you take that?
Well, at first it was a shock because I was counting on that, and I had my financial plan, and that's a part of my financial plan.
Yeah.
But I couldn't disagree with her because she was right, and we had made the decision fairly within about 10 years of our marriage, of our spiritual priority. And so we've never been out of sync when it comes to really generosity.
Mm-hmm.
We both do a lot of non-deductible cash giving.
Yeah.
And probably get more pleasure out of that giving than we do giving our tithes and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I carry cash with me as she does, and we look for people that are unseen and try to give to them. And the most common for me is with the travel that I do. I'm in airport bathrooms a lot, and the person or persons that clean those bathrooms are unnoticed.
Yeah.
And so I just make it a habit to find a person and give them some money.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
And I always, when I check out a rental car, I'll give the gate agent that lets us out some money.
Mm.
And it's always amazing. Their first reaction is, "No, I can't take that."
Yeah.
Almost in every case, because they've never experienced it.
Mm.
Nobody's tried to do that before.
Yeah. I'm sure it doesn't happen every day.
No. And then we've got a couple of families. We've got one single mom that came out of the inner city that had no real skill set. And so she's raising 3 kids, and she didn't have a vocation or education or examples.
Hmm.
So we have been supporting her, not 100% at all, but significantly over the last, probably 8 to 10 years, I would guess.
Hmm.
And we've got another family that they had 2 kids of their own. They adopted 3 from Ethiopia, and then a family lost both parents and had 5 kids.
Wow.
And they took all 5 kids in and adopted them, so they had 10 kids.
Wow.
And so we help them, and sometimes we would go to Costco and fill up a cart, and then take it over and give it to them.
Oh, that's
just
awesome.
things that they might need.
Yeah.
So that type of giving is just is real. There's a joy associated with that, and a sense also of making a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when you give to a ministry or to your church, it's hard to feel the impact of that because it's just a part of the budget.
Yeah.
But when you give it to somebody personally, there's there's a personal relationship, and we've really enjoyed that type of giving more than any other type.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Now, you mentioned, early on in your marriage, you kind of had that alignment on your spiritual priorities when it comes to giving. And you mentioned that your wife, it sounds like you said, would give away anything. Was there ever a point in your marriage where there was some discussion or friction on what that looked like in your marriage, as far as like, hey, we're going to give to this organization, or we're going to give to this group, or we're going to give to this church? How did you guys navigate the conversation around giving in your marriage?
Well, we were almost always in agreement with where we gave.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what I know is that people give where they have relationship. So, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So no one person can meet all the financial needs of everybody. So, and I think God designed it that way, and that's called community.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would give a lot to places where there was relationship already established, and we probably both had that relationship. In a couple of cases, more so her than me, she would go maybe to a conference or an event of some sort and really identify with that particular ministry. I didn't know much about it,
Mm-hmm.
but she would come back and say, "I'd like to support these people. These are they're really doing good things."
Yeah.
And I would never say no to something like that.
Yeah.
Um, so we giving is kind of a constant part of our life. And we also kind of threw giving in where we had family needs.
Mm-hmm.
So I had one daughter that was a single mom for 6 years.
Mm.
Well, we spent a lot in supporting her because she didn't have the support.
Yeah.
And we've got an older son now that's really struggles with depression and bipolar, and he really struggles financially because he feels like he's not making a contribution.
Mm.
And he feels behind all of the time, and so Judy and I agree that whatever we do in our finances, we're going to make sure he's taken care of.
Yeah.
I have a statement that I make when I teach on estate planning, and that is, if you love your children equally, you'll treat them uniquely.
Mm. And when you say love your children equally, treat them uniquely, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's like the daughter that was a single mom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because we supported her, we didn't have any sense of obligation to the other 4 kids.
Yeah.
She had the need, we had the ability. The kids never questioned it because they knew our philosophy on that. And so, and then you've got situations where you have special needs kids,
Yeah,
or grandkids, and taking care of them is a unique thing. And I think that a lot of it, traditionally, as kind of estate planning, everything is given equally.
Mm.
But that's not necessarily a good thing or a desirable thing at all.
Yeah. And you said the idea of just treating each child uniquely. I think that's...
They're unique people.
Yeah.
So, and one of the other things that I say a lot of times is do your giving while you're living, so you're knowing where it's going.
Mm.
So I think giving now, that's where you get the joy.
Yeah.
You're not going to get any joy when you're dead. You don't have the choice. anymore. That's gone.
Yeah,
You missed your chance.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Now, for the couples that are listening to this that maybe have like a tight financial budget and maybe are living paycheck to paycheck or something like that, and you hear on a church sermon the idea of, hey, tithing is important, giving is important, it's important to be generous with your money, and they're looking at each other thinking, hey, we're just barely making ends meet as it is. What advice or encouragement would you give to that couple?
Well, one piece of advice that I would give would be you need to come together on your decision.
Hmm.
Okay, and remember that it's not her decision or your decision, it's our decision. Uh, and I think that's a part of growing in a marriage because that point of difference causing communication can cause a better relationship.
Hmm.
Whereas if you ignore it and it festers, it can be a real barrier to good relationship and communication.
Yeah.
So it's yes, we're going paycheck to paycheck, but are we in agreement with our giving?
Hmm.
Because one of the people may say we can't afford to give. Another would say, well, we have to give. It's biblical.
Yeah.
You got to reconcile that.
Yeah. I was going to say, do you know, like in that example of one person saying giving is super important and the other person saying we can't afford to buy groceries, do you have any advice on how to navigate that conversation from maybe the work that you've done with some other couples?
Well, I tell you this, Judy became a believer 2 years before I did. And by training, I'm a CPA, and um, she told a friend of, this is really funny, a friend of her committed their lives to Christ at the same Bible study, same time.
Yeah.
And Judy told her friend, she said, you know, Ron might become a Christian, but God will never get his pocketbook. So to end up in the ministry that I have is a little ironic, but when she became a believer, she wanted to give. I wasn't a believer, had no desire whatsoever to give. So she never forced that issue. And she lived out a life that was compelling, but she never talked about the fact that we should be giving because she knew how I felt about that.
Yeah.
Well, and she says, and I agree, I'm not so sure I'd have come to Christ had she forced me to give during that 2 years while I watched her. It would have been a real source of conflict.
Yeah.
So, but she's a very wise lady also. So
It sounds like it. Yeah.
yes.
Now, as far as, you talked about the idea of not forcing your spouse into giving if that's not where they're at. But are there any other big financial missteps or mistakes that you've seen couples take on a regular basis? Like, what are the big pitfalls that a lot of couples can fall into when it comes to finances?
Well, the biggest one, just kind of start at the bottom, if you will. The biggest one is not living according to a plan or a budget or some orderliness about your finances, and so it's that's the biggest mistake. The other big mistake, I think, is that and men tend to make this mistake. They don't necessarily, obviously I'm speaking generally, but men are not easy to accept their wife's advice on money. And where it really comes in is debt. Now, a man, let's just assume that we've got a working husband and a stay-at-home mom. Well, the working husband has a sense of where that money came from.
Mm-hmm.
The spouse doesn't necessarily have that sense of where it came from, and so that right away causes a possibility of misunderstandings and miscommunications.
Yeah, some friction there for sure.
But I think I've had more than one couple where debt was the issue. Am I going to borrow money for and whatever? And so I counseled the people that I worked with that husband and, in fact, I counseled men this way. I said, men, if you have this idea that this is a can't lose opportunity, and you share it with your wife, if she doesn't understand it, then you've done a poor job at communicating, or it's not something you should be doing.
Yeah.
And if she does understand it, but says she's not comfortable with it, don't do it.
Mm.
And there's many men have listened to that counsel and have avoided things that would have been catastrophic in their lives financially.
Yeah.
Again, God put us together. As my mentor Howie Henry used to say, if you agree on anything, one of you is not necessary. So,
yeah. Well, that kind of brings me to my next question, kind of going hand in hand with this point. But, the idea of big financial decisions, we're going to go out and buy a house, we're going to buy a car, we're going to start a business, whatever it may be. How do you navigate that dynamic in marriage? Especially, you might be at different places of the decision making. It sounds like one of the things you would advocate for is just making sure you're on the same page. But any other advice for couples when making big financial decisions?
Yeah, for sure you should be on the same page. And I think one of the big mistakes, we'll take a house for example. A house means something different to a woman than it does to a man. It's her place of life, if you will, and so it has more significance than what a man has. A man might, obviously I'm generalizing, but a man might say he wants the home to make an impression on the people that he wants to impress.
Mm.
A wife would rarely go there, but a man might. And a man may not understand why the wife wants what she wants in a house. So going through the conversation of what are our objectives, goals, what do we want this to look like is really important. And secondly, what can we afford? Lenders do not have your best interest at heart.
Yeah.
Okay, they've got their best interest at heart. So when you have a mortgage, for example, you probably weekly get offers you got all this equity in this house, why don't you use the equity to do something fun?
Yeah.
So once again, you can fall into the trap. I think there's three things, Rob, that kind of come into play when it comes to money. One is there's confusion.
Mm.
Who do you listen to? Because you can't turn on television without hearing a money advertisement or a product advertisement.
Yeah, spend your money on this or invest in this or any of that stuff.
Yeah. And you get confusion because perhaps you're in your family you never had any guidance. Mm-hmm. You're not getting it off the pulpit necessarily. So you may be getting it from peers, your advice, but do they know? So there's confusion about who do I trust to give me advice when it comes to a financial decision. So the confusion is a really big thing I get, for example, every night at the end of news, every newscast ends the same way, and they say, "Well, the Dow did this today, and the S&P did this,"
Mm-hmm.
and I always want to say, "So what?" So what's that mean to me?
Uh-huh.
And that's got to raise some confusion in people. So how am I to interpret that?
Yeah.
If they say the Dow went up 400 points today, well, I missed that one. Or went down 400 points. Well, I was lucky today.
Yeah.
So confusion is one, and I think a second is fear.
Mm.
And I think fear is demonstrated by three questions that we ask ourselves. And they are, when you put them all together, it's the answer to the question, how am I doing?
Mm.
Well, and what people are really concerned about is, will I ever have enough? And if I do, will it always continue to be enough?
Mm.
And by the way, how much is enough?
Yeah.
In fact, I did a conference call yesterday with a group of people, and it's a group of women. And one of the questions was, how much money do I need when I retire? Well, that's a question that you can't answer now.
Mm.
Because it's not an amount of money necessarily. It's really a function of your lifestyle, which is the biggest use of money that we have. So the fear is, it was demonstrated by these three questions. Will I ever have enough? And that's a fear question.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, will it continue to be enough? And that's a fear question. And third, by the way, how much is enough? And that's a confusion question. So if you look at those three things, those are the barriers to good thinking and good decision making. And it's why we need probably accountability someplace, and we certainly need unity in the marriage.
Yeah.
On this, and two people are better than one when it comes to figuring it all out.
Yeah. And you talked about the idea of confusion and fear, and I totally resonate with that. The idea of confusion, you turn on the TV and they're telling you to invest in this or throw your money in that or whatnot. And it can be really tricky to understand, like, hey, what actually is wise for my family?
Yeah.
And then when you put that in the context of marriage, of both people, both having those same fears and probably an element of confusion, it can just feel really tricky to navigate some of those large financial decisions. Now,
Right.
would you be an advocate? I know you mentioned this early on in the conversation, the idea of bringing in a third party.
Mm-hmm.
If you're making a big purchase like a house or a car or something like that, that sounds like that might be a really important piece into that equation as well.
Yeah, I think so. It's part of the problem is that the blind lead the blind. So who you ask is important.
Mm.
And I think there's a big difference between wisdom and knowledge. So we get a lot of knowledge, but wisdom interprets that knowledge differently. And that's what God promises us. He said that He would give us wisdom. And wisdom is making decisions that look and feel different, because they're wisdom type decisions and questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in addition to confusion and fear, there's a third one that nobody talks about. Tim Keller said it this way. He said, "I've had every sin that you can imagine confessed in my study, with the exception of greed."
Mm.
Nobody has come in and said, "Pastor, I've got a problem with greed."
Yeah.
But, and we're living, I think now, this is particularly important because we're living in a time and in a culture where money is like it's never been before. There's never been a culture that is as wealthy as this one. Somebody said, "Oh, I know. I was watching the news last night, and one of the people said there's 900 billionaires in the United States." Well, that's 15 years ago. That number might have been one or two.
Yeah.
But there's been so much wealth created. But we know intuitively when you pick a billionaire and ask yourself the question, is he happy? You know, is he content? Is he joyful? And my bet is that there may be some exceptions, but I bet almost 100% the answer would be no.
Yeah.
Which, you know, they're getting divorced, they're buying their second yacht, they have an airplane, homes, multiple homes. What does it take? Where's the finish line? So we're living at a time like that, and that's where I say you've got to be on guard against greed, because greed is saying, boy, would I like to have that. Now, you can deal with that quickly, but when you become obsessive with it, and it drives your life, then that's a big problem.
Yeah.
So, I tell advisors, see, if you follow biblical principles of money management, principles are timeless, they're transcendent, and they're because they're timeless. I say you need to put on your business card. My advice is always right, always relevant, and will never change.
Yeah.
So you think about that. If you're following a biblical principle, it will always be right. And the principle applied to your situation will be relevant to you. And it's not going to change 1,000 years from now. It's still the same. So managing money hasn't changed in thousands of years. It's still almost old-fashioned. I was testifying before a congressional subcommittee a number of years ago, and I said to the senator asked me what I would tell people about money, and I said, number one, live within your income, spend less than you earn. Secondly, avoid the use of debt. Because debt always, what I call mortgages the future. It obligates you in the future. Third is to provide liquidity or margin in your financial situation so that when the emergencies happen, and they will, you've got the resources there to take care of them. Fourth, set long-term goals. And the reason for that is that the only way you're going to meet a long-term goal is to not spend it in the short term. So there's a trade-off between the short term and the long term. And I'm not saying that everything should be saved. That's called hoarding. But you need some goals, and you need to have an understanding about your progress toward those goals. And then lastly is to give generously. And the reason for that is that generosity and giving is the only way to break the power of money. You've got to let go of it, or it owns you.
Yeah.
So those 5 principles of money management are really simple to say, and they're easy to understand, but then you've got to apply them. You got to live within your income, and you got to avoid taking on the debt that you shouldn't, and you've got to set aside some for savings, and you got to set some aside. Obviously, you have to pay your taxes also, and you should be giving. So,
yeah, And I love that list of those 5 things because, like you said, they're real simple. It's just a matter of holding on to them and making sure that you're living it out. And that can be tricky, but such a simple way of framing it in a marriage context too. Of hey, if we can do these 5 things really, really well, we'll be in a good place.
Yeah, and that's a good basis for conversation. Is are we doing that? And if we're not, what do we need to change?
Yeah.
And the other thing that the beauty of all of this is God's ways are not complicated. I mean, those are pretty simple, but they're eternal in their consequence. And the other thing is that there's really only 5 ways to spend your money, 5 places to put your money. We call it live, give, owe, grow.
Okay.
So you can remember it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to spend money on my lifestyle. I'm not talking about my living expenses. I'm talking about my lifestyle expenses. You're going to spend money to pay off debt. You're going to spend money to pay your taxes. You should be spending money to give. And did I say debt? Pay off your debt?
Yeah. And I think you're missing grow.
Growth, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
money for the long term. So those are the only 5 buckets. And if when I speak, I challenge people. I say you can figure out your priorities in about 30 minutes. If you take your tax return, on your tax return is your income. Okay, so I know my income.
Mm-hmm.
On my tax return are my taxes, so that's one use. On my tax return is my charitable giving. That's a second use. I know how much debt I'm paying because that comes generally monthly.
Yeah.
And I know how much well, you see your giving is on your tax return. I've said that one. And you know what you're saving for the long term. Maybe it's a pension plan or a savings plan or something. So you know 4 out of the 5 uses of money. Think about it. It's easy to come up with those. So if you take your income, subtract those 4 uses, what's left is the money that you're spending on your lifestyle. And if you put that in a Excel spreadsheet and do a pie chart on it, what you have is a picture of your priorities. So the first time I did this and I showed it to my wife, I showed her what our pie chart looked like. She looked at it just briefly and she says, "We're doing okay, aren't we?" Now there was not a number on there. But what she saw was that our giving percent was the same as our lifestyle expense percent.
Yeah.
And she saw that there was 0 debt. So there was only really 4 uses of money.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we added grandkids, I had to add the 5th category. It's called grandkids. So we do have 5 uses. But that pie chart immediately illustrates your both the good and the bad. And it doesn't take long to figure out, well, I really need to, whenever I change one piece of that pie, it changes the other 4 also.
Yeah.
I showed this to Rick Warren, Pastor Warren from Saddleback Church, some months ago now, because we put it in a 1-pager. We call it the 4-H tool. And I showed that 4-H tool to Rick. And the 4 H's were, first of all, was your heart. Where's your heart? Do you believe God owns it all? Second were those 5 habits. Third were those, we would call it health, the pie chart. And the 4th corner was the hope corner, and that was, where are we financially? Are we struggling? Are we surviving? Are we stable? Are we secure? Do we have a surplus? Which is about 5 categories there. Mm-hmm. And you can immediately see where you are in managing your money up to this point, but you can also see then what I need to change in order to get that pie chart looking the way I'd like for the pie chart to look.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, I explained that whole thing in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And Rick Warren, when I showed it to him, he said, "This is brilliant." He said, "It simplifies everything."
Yeah.
And it does. It brings it down, and it says, managing your money, and incidentally, and that particular, the pie, or the 4-H's, that particular piece of paper, is a great conversation piece for a husband and wife to come together on money.
Yeah.
Because they can look at their hearts, they can look at the habits they formed, they can look at their priorities, they can look at where they are financially and where they might go, and have a lot of meaningful conversations. So it's a framework of thinking and decision making.
And that kind of comes back to where we started this conversation, the idea of just communication and being on the same page and having those rhythms of syncing up. And I love the idea of, you mentioned confusion and fear being such a big part of this feeling that we have about money, and having a simple tool, like you talked about, this 4-H tool, to go back and just say, hey, let's keep it real simple, not confusing. Where are we? Are we in a good spot? And using that as a jumping off point for a conversation in your marriage to say, hey, are we doing well? What changes do we need to make? What are our priorities? I really love that idea. Now,
Well, and in your ministry to couples, you can go on our website and pull that down.
Yeah.
And it's a terrific tool to start a conversation. And the beauty of it is it's holistic. In other words, there's nothing missing out there.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't talk about investments, because the people that end up the best, they generally don't do it through investments.
Mm.
They do it by not spending in the short term and saving for the future through a pension plan or through a savings program. So the decision to live within my income is the central decision that people need to make. And you can see, when you look at the pie chart, if you use debt to fund that lifestyle, debt, it always obligates the future.
Mm-hmm.
And as an accountant, I know this also, and I use this illustration just because I'm quirky, but the illustration I use is, what is 0% financing a good deal? We hear that all the time.
All the time, yeah.
Well, let's say you buy a $30,000 car with 0% financing. Okay, 30 days after you bought it, what's it worth?
A lot less than what you bought it for.
That's right. Okay, so it was not a good investment, first of all. But here's the really costly part. If you're going to pay back $30,000 worth of debt, you've got to earn maybe as much as $45,000 to do a tithe and to pay your taxes, or $40,000, $45,000. So that car didn't cost you $30,000; it really cost you $40,000 or $45,000. And that's the math on it, and the taking into account taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is why debt is so devastating to financial success. Now, there are some I don't characterize all debt as being a sin. The Bible doesn't call debt a sin. It just says it may be stupid. But it says the lender or borrower becomes the lender's slave.
Mm-hmm.
And and that is true because of all of the uses of money. The only one that's going to be knocking on your door if you don't pay is the banker. He's the first one that's going to be knocking on the door.
Mm-hmm.
They know whether you're paying or not. The tax man takes them a long time to figure it out.
Yeah.
Um, so, um, if you buy a home, for example, and you borrow, have a mortgage, and you put a reasonable amount of money down on the home, that is debt that has a guaranteed way to repay. Sell the house.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you for sure would want to have some equity in your home. So, to borrow money to buy a house is not necessarily a real negative thing at all. Um, the Here's another one that I get. What about student debt?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a good idea or not? Well, student debt has become so incredible that so many people can't afford to repay it. But if you're reasonable on your student debt and have a reasonable plan of repayment, then borrowing money to better your job opportunities is not necessarily a bad decision.
Mm-hmm.
I had a young lady that worked for me, and she was the first one in her family to go to college, and she had to fund college herself. And so she committed to never have more than, I think it was $15,000 in student debt. Well, she that meant that she had to work while she went to school.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Okay. She had to watch how she spent her money so that she didn't overspend. Nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
And she went 4 years, and she had $16,000 in student debt. She went home, lived with her parents, got a job, and paid off the $16,000 in 10 months. Okay.
Yeah.
So she had a plan, and she pulled it off. And we were talking amongst ourselves. She worked with us in a group at Indiana Wesleyan University, and somebody she said, not only did I keep my debt at 16,000, I bought a car for 5,000 on that, and I put $1,000 away in an emergency fund.
Wow. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Now, she did that all on her own. This was not because of good advice that I'd given her, or we'd given her. She'd figured that out. Well, she had to pay her way through school, which meant she had to give up things.
Mm-hmm.
But she set herself up, and not only that, she set her husband up. My pastor one time said, I wanted my kids to graduate from college, but I forgot that they were going to get married. And they took on that debt.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's one of the things, we have premarital retreats that we do at WinShape, and it's always interesting to see how many couples that are about to get married have no clue about the financial picture of the person that they're marrying. And so
Right.
during our retreats, we encourage them to, have that conversation. And it's just a really eye-opening conversation for a lot of couples to understand the complete picture of what you're about to step into and what comes along with that. But
Yeah.
well, Ron, I know we've touched on a whole lot of stuff here. For one couple that's listening, what's one piece of advice or encouragement you'd want them to walk away from this conversation with? I know there's been a lot of great nuggets in here.
Well, it says in God's Word, He has given us all things to enjoy. So my desire for people is that they live a life financially joyfully.
Mm-hmm.
And that would require living with the disciplines that we talked about and doing the giving and so forth. So my piece of advice would be for couples is to start talking to one another. And my advice to people that are just starting out is start out with a plan to live within your income.
Mm-hmm.
Don't fall into the trap of overbuying and taking on a lifestyle that you really can't afford yet. You maybe can afford it at some point. But overspending on a lifestyle causes angst and anxiety. So, once again, it's really pretty simple stuff, but it's all what God has done is He has given us over the last 40 years the proof of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So all that I have said to me is what I would call the proof of concept, and that is that God's word speaks to money management and it works.
Yeah.
So,
and just having the obedience to follow His biblical principles for us and live a lifestyle in that. Well, Ron, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And for those that tuned into this episode of the WinShape Marriage Podcast, thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll catch you right back here next week.
We hope that conversation blesses your marriage. If you're loving the WinShape Marriage Podcast, will you please take a moment to make sure you're subscribed? You may be a faithful listener and not realized you aren't subscribed. It really helps us out. Also, if you've enjoyed these conversations and they've impacted your marriage, please rate and review this podcast. One listener said, "Thanks so much for pouring into couples with godly wisdom and practical equipping."